Wanted to talk a little bit about the college admissions process in an attempt a little bit to demystify it. I think especially this time of year, and Joey certainly knows, having gone through the process recently, that, I'm not trying to put you on the spot,
No worries.
that the process can be grueling, and we kind of always talk about it's a long haul from really when the process of post-secondary planning starts to ramp up around, spring of junior year, through, we're still talking about it.
Yeah.
In January, we will continue to talk about it up through May 1, which is kind of generally the commitment date for schools, unless students have committed earlier. So it is a long process. It can be very stressful. I think sometimes for students and families, and even for us as counselors, it can feel a little bit arbitrary in terms of the decision-making process, and we can all feel a little bit disheartened occasionally or surprised. Sometimes we're delighted, but so the purpose of the meeting today, or me coming here, is just to kind of talk a little bit about how it works and how the admissions committees makes decisions. So before I get to the how they're making the decision, just want to make sure that we talk about what is actually being evaluated. So when a student applies to college, and we have, as you know, about 80% of our students are going on to a 4-year school directly, and then another 10% going to a 2-year school. We have an increasing number in students doing a gap year, so those students who are deferring their enrollment into a 2 or 4-year school by doing something in the interim. And generally speaking, those students are then going on to a 4-year school. So that tends, like I said last year, tends to be our population. So the conversation tends to kind of be centered on college admissions. So when a student applies to college, they are submitting, or the application is made up of a bunch of different parts. And for large part, the biggest, most important academic part of the application, we kind of call it the quantitative piece. So that's made up of the transcript, which is the student's entire 4 years broken down into the 4 years. So all of the freshman classes and their final average grades, all of their sophomore classes, junior classes, and all their average grades. It also includes the student's GPA. So a student's GPA is made up of the final average grades. If students have taken honors or AP level classes, they get an extra 10% weight on those grades. So that is reflected up at the top of their transcript in the GPA. And so I only mention up through junior year because, and I'll get to this a little bit later, it depends on when a student applies to college, what grades ultimately end up on that transcript, on that first round of applications. So I'll get to that in a sec. So the transcript is by far the most important piece of the academic part of the application. So they're evaluating everything that's in the transcript. So what is the story that transcript is telling about the student academically? They look at every year of grades, and all of those years are very important. I think so often it comes up that junior year is a big year, it's the most important year, but I always argue that freshman year is probably the most important year because it's the year that you really are setting the tone in terms of your habits, you're setting that GPA, which really ultimately is very sticky and hard to move mathematically. So I always argue that the freshman year is maybe the most important year. By junior year, if you're just kind of starting to think about your transcripts, it's late to be thinking about that. So they're looking at grade trends, they're looking at strength of curriculum, so to what extent students have been taking on academic risks and challenging themselves, and certainly academic risk and challenge is different for every student. But they're looking at that particular student within the context of that student. So they're looking at all of your transcript, the GPA, and the strength of curriculum and grade trends. So sometimes students have a rocky transition to high school, and then the trajectory is kind of on an upward swing, and they really, that's something they like to see. Or there could be a dip in a transcript. Sophomore year, maybe a student had a concussion or something like this, and the story kind of evolves, and that's in part, well, I'll get to this in a second, part of the counselor's evaluation, so we would discuss that as well. So in terms of the quantitative piece, the transcript GPA, that is like the biggest, most important part of the application. And then following that in terms of numbers would be the standardized testing. And when I talk about standardized testing, I'm referring to specifically the SAT or the ACT. And now colleges really accept one or the other. They don't care which. The SAT had a major overhaul a couple years ago, and so now the standardized tests look much more similar than they ever did. And we could sort of debate the strengths and weaknesses of both, but essentially they're assessing aptitudes and strengths of students and curriculum. And so that is an important element of the application, and we sort of recently heard from an expert a couple weeks ago. Although it is an important part of the application, it is really not the only part of not the only thing that they consider. And certainly the transcript GPA and strength of curriculum is much more important than the standardized test score. The standardized score is a snapshot of 3 hours or 3.5 hours of a student's experience in a classroom where they're taking a test. They may not have been their best self that day. So it is an element that gets evaluated, and it's an important element that gets evaluated. It can affect things like financial aid for students in terms of merit aid. So it is an important part of the process, but it isn't everything. So that kind of summarizes the quantitative piece of the application. But the other things that they're looking at to really kind of help round out the student and paint them as a real three-dimensional person are these sort of qualitative elements of the application, which are a bit more fun to talk about. One of those things is the personal essay. So for the most part, students will be submitting an application through what they call the Common App. And the Common App is just that. It's the most common application out there, over 600 member schools. For our school, we have a lot of students that apply mostly to Common App schools. And as part of that application, all schools will see at least one essay. For the past couple of years, they've maintained the same prompts. The students answer the prompt. It is an opportunity not to regurgitate your resume or your extracurricular activities or a particular challenge. It's a way to kind of interview through your writing, and you're really like your only opportunity to have a voice and talk about kind of who you are that isn't covered elsewhere in your application, whereas like your resume and your activities and all those things, those will be covered elsewhere in the application. So the essay is a crucial opportunity for students to kind of present themselves as a human being. So they'll be looking at that. And college admissions committees love to read the essay. And we always kind of say, if you're not funny, don't try to be funny. Now is not the time. You really just want to present yourself as original, as authentic as you possibly can. And whoever you are, that's going to be great, and that's going to come out in your essay. And so, our department works very closely with the students on sort of how does that read? How are you presenting yourself? What is the message that you're sending by this particular element of your application? So the personal essay is a big one. Another major qualitative piece will be the counselor evaluation, the teacher recommendation. So this adds a totally different perspective to the application. It's an opportunity for other people in the students' lives to comment on their work in the classroom, their activities outside of the classroom, their integrity, their character, the choices that they make, which is why it's so important for students, and Joey knows this firsthand because he's excellent at it. I know it's not surprising. How important it is to develop those relationships with teachers. Again, going back to this idea of freshman year being an important year, those relationships start to develop very early on. So being involved in the community, your extracurriculars, participating in class discussion, showing up for the band concert, your behavior on the football field, all of those things kind of go into a teacher's and a counselor's ability to write a recommendation letter. So it is excellent that we have a small community because we really do get to know the students and are able to kind of comment on all of those things. So the counselor evaluation, teacher evaluations are an enormous part of the application process. There is a section called additional info, and some schools will have supplements. So in addition to that sort of one common application that the students are submitting, some schools, mostly the selective schools, but in general, some schools will kind of say, that's great, we're looking at all of this Common App sort of materials that are in as part of this application, your biographical information, your education information, your extracurriculars, this one essay prompt that you've answered, but we also kind of want to know X, Y, Z. And that could be like, why UVM, or where's Waldo, or what are your hopes and dreams, or tell me, a former president that you'd like to meet. It's another opportunity, again, for the students to have a voice. It's also another opportunity for the students to describe their sense of self and why they think they will fit that particular school's environment, and also how that particular school's environment might be a good fit for them. And that fit is an important part of this process, and I'll get to that again in a second on how it is that they're making admissions decisions and why it seems arbitrary or, you know, I don't mean to be crass, but why it kind of like seems like a crapshoot to us, but really isn't on the other end. And then a couple of just follow-up things, you know, these aren't also elements that are always evaluated, but are often evaluated. So students sometimes have an opportunity to interview. Sometimes an interview is required for certain schools and or certain programs, so they really kind of want to have a one-on-one sense. And so that's another sort of qualitative piece that gets evaluated. Oftentimes, admissions committees will send out an alumni, and the alumni will coordinate directly with the student. They go meet at Panera or Starbucks, they have a conversation, and then that alumni will provide a report back to the admissions committee about that particular applicant. And then finally, demonstrated interest. So demonstrated interest is exactly how it sounds. The extent to which a student has demonstrated interest in a particular school, and many schools will measure students' demonstrated interest by particular software. So they download software that gets used. It's essentially a database management system, but they are able to track everything from the students after they took the PSAT sophomore year. Once email communication has started to go out, has the student opened the email communication? Have they clicked on links? What parts of their website have they interacted with? And so they're measuring all these things. They measure, have they gone on a campus tour? I know I'm overwhelming you. Have they gone on a campus tour? Have they had an interview? Was there an admissions visit? Did they send, you know, a follow-up thank you note? They're measuring all of these things. And again, like, this kind of demonstrated interest and or interview, these elements aren't necessarily at the forefront of how they're making admissions decisions. But if you have an applicant, and so this is what we're told, if you have an applicant that's kind of on the fence or not really sure, then they go to things like demonstrated interest, interview, and will it make or break an admissions decision? We have no idea. So, you know, and I'll get to this at the end, like our recommendation always to the students, and we kind of just talked about this tonight when I walked in the building and was just chit-chatting with some seniors, it's like, we encourage the students to just be themselves. You be your authentic self, you be you, you choose your own path, you set your own goals, and if you do that, you are going to land where you're supposed to land. We can't possibly make recommendations to students. I think you drive yourself absolutely bananas trying to do this, trying to tailor your path to some seemingly arbitrary need or priority of a school that you may or may not apply to. So I will get to the part about how they make admissions decisions. Oops, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. And so I will talk a little bit about timelines just briefly. Am I okay on time? Mm-hmm. Okay. This is, you know, again, so part of our philosophy is this is a highly individualized process. Just like any post-secondary plan is highly individualized. Every student is extremely different. Nobody's transcript looks the same. Nobody's experience looks the same. Their homes don't look the same. Their goals don't look the same. So this is very individualized, and we encourage them to sort of embrace that on their own, because I think, going back to my earlier point of it does feel like a long haul. Being in a small town is excellent, but it also can be tough on the students because there's always a conversation about where you're going, what are you doing, what's your plan, what are you thinking, did you get in early, you know, I heard you were applying to such and such, and so that can be really tough on the students. And I think we just constantly are encouraging them to remember that this is highly individualized. You can't possibly compare yourself, you know, to the next guy or girl who's sitting next to you. And their process really depends on themselves and where they're at. So, you know, the extent to which you've done a lot of research, you've taken your standardized test, you have a sense of what, you know, possible school environment or even just geographical location might make sense for you will help determine when you apply. So, you know, we've had a lot of success and a lot of, you know, we've been promoting our students and sort of talking about our students recently in the news, or in sort of our own internal news, about some admissions decisions. And it happens to be that we had a huge increase in students applying both early action and early decision this year. And so I'll just like briefly summarize the difference. So early action, early decision both refer to early deadline. So that is when a student applies to schools at an earlier deadline than the regular decision deadline, which is January 1. So if January 1 is sort of the regular decision deadline, the earlier decisions are generally 11-1. So they're usually 11-1 or 11-15. That's both for early decision and early action. The difference is, and I like to think of like early decision is like you 100% know you've made the decision, you're going to this school, you're committed to it. And so that is like the essence of early decision. You are signing up for the school despite any financial aid award package. You say to the school, if you accept me, I agree to come. The student signs a contract, the counselor signs a contract, and the parent sign a contract, kind of all on the same page. So again, like if, the school is $65,000 a year, you say, I'm willing to pay the $65,000 a year if you accept me. And there are a lot of schools like that. So early action is when you apply early, you hear back. So I guess the benefit in both of the cases is that you hear back early, generally around mid-December, so before we go away for the holiday break. Early action is when you hear back, but you don't have to commit. So you hear back, and if you get accepted, that's great news for you. You have kind of something in your back pocket where you're not stressed. There's some reassurance about that. And I think a lot of students feel good about having some early acceptances from the early action pool. Some of the other considerations for applying early action or early decision, with either deadline, you have to have that transcript, those freshman, sophomore, and junior year grades, and those standardized tests all have to be exactly how you want them to be by 11/1. So your junior year average, your GPA, and your strength of curriculum has to really like meet or exceed the mid 50% of the schools to which you're applying. So the reason why is because those schools know that students who are applying are going to be more competitive and already have those things polished and ready to go, and therefore those pools are going to be much more competitive. So if you think about it, your students have taken maybe the SAT once, their freshman, sophomore, or junior year grades are hopefully really strong, but then they come to school, they think, oh gosh, I haven't talked to my teachers about recommendations yet, I think I might want to take the SAT again, or I haven't even taken one yet, which one should I take? And so all of that has to be taken care of. At the same time, senior year is very, very busy. I'm sure you can attest to that. There's a lot going on that first semester. And so thinking about the college admissions process is just kind of like one more even like class or project that you're trying to manage with a lot of moving parts. So thinking about the decision to apply early action or early decision is not one necessarily to take lightly. And again, sort of for early decision, you kind of think about, well, you really have had to make that decision by October of your senior year, and that sometimes for a lot of students feels early. So I have research on there. Students have had to do a lot of research and a lot of preparation going into that early deadline. Other thoughts about early action and early decision. So those are certainly the benefits of applying. The negatives, sort of as I mentioned, is just having things wrapped up before you apply. A possible consideration, I would say certainly in my experience, and the other counselors would certainly attest to this, and I think the North Shore Directors Group, we always kind of see anecdotally that from an admissions perspective, if you apply early decision, and you can see on the websites they publish all of their ED decisions, they take a large piece of the applicant pool from ED. And the reason for it is yield. So those students who apply, who are accepted, they can sort of bank on revenue, they know what's coming in earlier on, they know they have a strong applicant pool, they can predict their mid 50% for the next year, so they kind of have a sense of what that pool will look like and how much money is kind of coming in. So that's another consideration. So sometimes students will sort of like try to strategize if they are in a financial situation that are able to do that, to kind of say, yes, I'd like to apply early, knowing that I might have a better shot of getting in. So those are sort of other considerations for early action, early decision. Did I miss anything on that, you think?
Pretty great.
Okay. All right, you stop me if you think I missed anything. So once they have all these pieces, this idea of like how it's evaluated and, what are my chances of getting in? I think we are really lucky here. We have Naviance, which is an online database sort of management system that we hold students really accountable for putting in information and data, and we also keep a lot of data that we try to keep it as accurate as possible, so when students are rising seniors and juniors too, they can see the averages of accepted students to these schools. So Naviance will show us that. So over the last 10 years, what are my chances based solely on those two quantitative factors? It plots you on a graph. It's a great jumping off point, but it's not everything, as we know. So the takeaway is, what are my chances of admission? How do I know if I might actually be accepted? We have a pretty good sense based on some of the academic information, and because we house all of that contextual data from Swampscott, we think we've got a pretty good idea, and judging on the past couple years, we think we have a sense, although every year we are surprised. We were just talking about this again. Last year, UMass Amherst surprised us. They denied a lot of students who in years prior would have been perfectly admissible candidates that we would have felt, this is a strong target, this is a likely choice for you. And that year, starting last year, they were denying students. And that was a surprise to us, although I did just recently read a Boston Globe article about, their administration is really trying to change the way UMass Amherst is and make it more like a Tufts was 10 years ago and a Northeastern was 5 years ago. And so if that's the way they're going, then we're in a little bit of trouble, because that has been a great, our flagship campus is an incredible institution. So we have a lot of students that apply and do end up going there. But part of the reason why we don't actually really even know, a lot of schools will do a recalculation of the GPA. So they look at that student transcript that our students have killed themselves trying to get a strong GPA, and they go and they recalculate it anyway. They take out all of the core classes, they recalculate the GPA. This is not a standardized process, of course, because nothing is. Some schools will include some electives, some schools won't. Some schools will recalculate based on program or major. So for an engineering, they may include some additional STEM-focused coursework. Some don't, but they're, in large part, a lot of schools will recalculate a GPA. They give extra, as they call it, a rigor rating to honors and AP classes. So we have honors and AP is given the same weight in our GPA, but some students at some schools will have an additional bump on their recalculated GPA if they've taken AP level classes. So that's sort of one element of it. Different schools prioritize different elements of the application. So some schools will say outright, we're really just kind of looking at that transcript GPA and those standardized test scores. Some will say we're looking at the transcript, we're looking at strength of curriculum, we really prioritize counselor and teacher evaluations and the essay. So all of them kind of publish different things. So again, it's one of those things we can't possibly manage all of these different parts. So again, kind of going back to that idea that you just kind of have to be yourself and just be your best self within sort of your high school experience and your post-secondary planning journey. That's just really the only way to do it. So the different schools are prioritizing different pieces of the application. They're looking at it all differently. They call it a holistic review, so you'll hear that often. They really are just referring to this idea that we're looking at the whole child, but yet, something that really stuck out for me a few years ago, we had a Harvard researcher come here and present on how elite colleges make admissions decisions, and something she said has always stuck with me. She said, we are not looking for well-rounded students. We are looking for well-rounded classes. And that's the part that really makes the most sense, right? They're trying to develop a well-rounded community. If they have a community of all well-rounded students, no one's really contributing in different areas and diversifying the campus. So that is a major piece of it. And so I'll get to that in a second. So different schools have varying enrollment priorities. So one year it could be that nursing candidates are very competitive and they don't have a lot of seats, and therefore selectivity is really or high. So that is really a competitive nursing program. But then the next year, a former CEO whose wife is a nurse and has a lot of money, wants to give back to his alma mater, gives back $15 million, all of a sudden it's gone to the nursing school, and now they have a different enrollment priority that particular year or for 2 years. Same thing with STEM, they might get money, they might get a grant, and so all of these things change every single year. We can't, again, possibly predict how that's going to go, but it does help inform how admissions committees are asked to make decisions on applicants. So that's one thing. And then finally, this again kind of makes it feel like, why is it that my friend Susie got in, but she's got an 88 GPA, they're publishing a 92, and I've got a 98, and my test scores are, 1370 on the SATs. What happened? How did I get deferred? Or how did I not get in? And the reason for that, probably, is because students get evaluated within their own pools once they're being looked at, not across pools. And so what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, a student is submitting an application, and really, their theme is about service and leadership. Well, if that's true, that student gets looked at against other students who have applied with a similar theme or background or focus, whether that's something that they think that they might go into or that's really in large part their experience up until that point. But they're getting evaluated within this sort of like service leadership pool. By contrast, their friends over here could be evaluated as part of either athletic recruit, maybe there's a legacy pool, maybe there's another pool that's race and ethnicity and diversification of campus on that, maybe another one is first generation, but first generation isn't getting evaluated against service and leadership, they're getting evaluated within their own pool. And so that's why it seems like it's totally arbitrary. It's not for them. It feels like that to us. And so I think that's one of those ways that we try to really, again, explain to the students, like, those admissions decisions cannot be any part of your self-worth. You just cannot look at it that way. We are not behind closed doors. We don't know what those decisions look like. We don't know how they arrived at those decisions, and our students are all incredibly talented and have the skills and are admissible to all the schools to which they're applying. It's just really dependent on kind of how they see that student fitting in with them based on their priorities and sort of their enrollment decisions that year. So that's that.
You thoroughly terrified me having a daughter who's a junior.
and I'm sitting back here with like 3 down, 1 to go, feeling really good.
Getting the acceptance letter.
Oh, really? Oh, good.
Do you feel like you have what you need and what what your department needs to help these kids?
Yeah, I just think we need to like all clone ourselves and have more hours in the day. So let me know how you figure out to have more hours in the day. Yeah, I mean, I do. I think we have an incredible team. We have a lot of fun. I think you kind of know us really well at this point, and I think it is a focus for us to really develop the relationships with these students and to get to know them by the time senior year rolls around, so we can really help them try to find good fit and help them constantly look at their application. This year and last year, but even this year more so, we're trying more and seeing how like more is more. Does that work? So we offered more boot camps this year. So what that looks like is we get the students one-on-one. We have them like in small groups, but we're here for a few hours every day. So this year we did every block, so 1 through 7, we offered the students. We did after school ones, we did night ones instead of doing, I think it was the curriculum night, or maybe it was parent-teacher conferences, I can't remember. We offered the first part of the day for the students to come in and kind of looking at the Common App and looking at Naviance with us, and then the parents, we offered an opportunity to come in at night and kind of see how that works, really doing like a lot of one-on-one college counseling where, I wouldn't say we've necessarily always done that. Like this year and last year were probably the first years where I've really gone through like every single activity in the student's common application. We help them really think critically about the language that they're using. How is it that you're positioning your resume? What kind of language is on a resume? Instead of saying, under your extracurricular activity for track, I run the 400 meters, what else is it that you're doing as part of the team? Do you just run 400 meters? Do you help coordinate fundraising? Are you thinking about, do you participate in team dinners? Are there younger students that you are helping to sort of evolve their skills and trying to help the students kind of think about outside the box? So, to answer your question, I think we just need more time and more counselors, but that will always be true. I think we have an amazing team who's dedicated to the students, and that includes everyone from our assistant to all of the guidance counselors, and the administration has been extremely supportive of all of our efforts, and so I thank them for that. I hope you'll agree. And so for the past couple of years, you don't have to lie to me too. I won't let you do it, Joey. Every year too, we put out a senior survey, so we're constantly trying to look for feedback on what else we can do better. Because I think it's also an evolution too. We learn with them as they go to, and as you can see, everything changes every year. So it's not like we know everything; it's always changing. Something that we're excited to go do, though, in a couple of weeks, we're going to Holy Cross as a group. We were invited to go see how the admissions committee works and how they make the decision. So we're going to see firsthand how they're looking at each individual application, which is really exciting for us. So stay tuned. I'm sure we'll be blogging about that. But so those kinds of things, like that kind of professional development, will continue to be really important for us. So just being in support of those kinds of activities, and I think again, like we talk a lot about college admissions, but the reality is we have a percentage of students who aren't doing that, and so I think also in supporting those students as we kind of go along the way, whether that's armed forces that they're looking at, career tech, what that looks like, you know, having us, you know, support professional development, those areas too, again, because those things are always evolving, and we don't know always, you know, best practices in everything every year, so, we've tried, you know, this year we had an armed services event, we, have career tech people come in, talk about licensure from the state, so we've done a lot of different things. I think that's just, it's just, we're hoping that more is more will work for everyone.
Great job.
Yeah.
Great job. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much for having me. I appreciate
Congratulations.
it.